So in this writing notes video, I'm not necessarily talking to graduate students, although this will be relevant for master's students looking into PhD programs, but I'm more talking to undergrad students looking to go to graduate programs. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to choose the right graduate program for you. Now, there's a couple of things that you always want to be thinking about with graduate programs that are not necessarily the same factors that a lot of people use when they're choosing an undergrad university. So, typically, some of the big factors that people use when they're choosing an undergrad university are proximity to themselves. So, for instance, at Penn State, where I work, we get a lot of people from Pennsylvania. When I worked at WVU as a doctoral student, we had a lot of West Virginians. People go to schools that are fairly local to them a lot of the time. So that's, for graduate school, ideally that's not necessarily a concern you want to put that much stock into. If there are particular reasons you need to stay in your local area, like if you have dependents or a significant other who has a location-based job or something like that, that's fine, that's legitimate. That substantially cuts down on your ability to find the right graduate program for you. So that is something you do want to think carefully about. Another reason people often choose undergrad universities is for their sports programs. A lot of people come to Penn State or WVU or schools like this for football. Not to play football, but to watch football and go to games and things like that. Do not make your graduate school selection based on the football team. Don't make your graduate school selection based on something like a sports team. It's not something that you want to let really influence your decision. Family history, legacy status is another reason people often choose undergrad programs. It's not a great reason to choose a graduate program because an undergrad program is not unimportant, because it definitely is. It is crucial. An undergrad education, you want a good quality undergraduate education, but graduate school training is specialization in a way that undergrad education is not. Undergrad education is generally geared at making you a well-rounded individual, whereas graduate school education is generally geared at making you a specialist. So the fact that your parent or parents, grandparents, whatever it was, went to a university is not necessarily a great reason to choose that school for graduate school. So those are some of the main reasons that people choose undergrad programs. Location is the only one for me that's got any legitimacy, and that's only if there's a particularly good reason for you to remain tied to a particular area. What you want to actually look at, and this is actually another difference between choosing an undergrad program and choosing a graduate program. The reputation of the school is somewhat less important. So typically when you're choosing an undergrad school, you look at rankings. You look at rankings for the school in general. So how does Penn State stack up against other U.S. universities? That's not a terrible thing to consider when looking at graduate programs, but it's not necessarily the most important thing. You may want to look more at the ranking of the individual department you'd be applying for. So how does the Penn State English department or Penn State nursing program, Penn State civil engineering program stack up against other engineering, civil engineering, nursing, or English programs, things like that. But ultimately, even the reputation of the program is not necessarily the most important thing. So what's the most important thing? Well, two most important things in my opinion. One is a practical one. One is a intellectual one, I guess I'd say. So, first off, the intellectual one is you want to choose a program that has at least one person, ideally multiple people, that you would be really interested in working with. So people who do the same kind of work that you want to do, people who you want to learn from. So how do you figure that out? Well, this is where it gets slightly trickier. You want to ideally you want to find a list of all of the schools that have graduate programs in your particular field within whatever geographic radius you're willing to travel. So there's a lot of websites online that can do this for you. A lot of websites that have just lists of graduate programs in different disciplines. And so if, say, you're only interested in programs in the Midwest, like you're not willing to move outside the Midwest, there are a lot of websites online where you can go. You can say, I want to be in an English master's program in these states. And they'll pull up a list of all of the programs that have all of the schools that have master's programs in that discipline. Then the real work begins. You want to go through those universities or those English departments' faculty lists and look at what people work on. You want to have figured out what it is you actually want to study, by the way. So you typically want to go into graduate school having some sense of what you want to specialize in. And I'll make another video about that at some point, about figuring out what scholarly approach you want to take in your studies. But you want to figure out what you want to do, and then look for people in those departments, in the whatever the relevant department is, who do that same thing. So, for instance, when I was applying for my doctoral program, I knew that I wanted to study contemporary drama. And so I looked at every school in New England, the Mid-Atlantic, the Midwest, and I looked at all of those programs. Every place that had a doctoral program, I looked through their faculty lists, and every place that had someone who works on modern or contemporary drama, I applied. And in the application letter, I talked about wanting to work with that person. I will make another video at some point, probably a bit further in the future, about graduate school application letters. But that's one of the things that you do, is you say, okay, what type of scholarship, what type of work do I want to do, and who's already doing that? So, for instance, if I wanted to be a post-colonial literature scholar, if I was really interested in, say, the literature of Southern Asia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc., I would not even apply to West Virginia University. Now, I did go to WVU, and I'm glad that I did. But if that was what I was interested in, there isn't anyone at WVU who specializes in that. So there'd be nobody that I could really work with who would help me advance my career in that subject area. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to be thinking about. What am I interested in doing? and who's going to help me get there. And that, for me, is the number one consideration that you should have when applying to graduate schools. Now, the number two consideration is a more practical or logistical one. And that is, you want to look for programs that will give you funding. Whether that's just sort of straight tuition waivers via scholarships, which is good if you only want to sort of be a scholar, or whether that's teaching assistant positions. And if what you want to do is be a professor, if you want to work in a university, and by the way, there are very big concerns about that, and I will talk about those probably in another video at some point. I know I'm promising a lot of future videos here, but if that's your ambition, if you want to be an educator, if you want to be a professor, then you want to look for programs where you can get a teaching position. And I actually got the advice when I was applying for my master's to not go to a school that wouldn't provide you funding, because that's an indication that they don't think you're going to be successful. Now, that's not 100% accurate, because there are programs that simply don't provide funding, or don't provide funding to everybody in the program. I would still be very, very cautious about paying for your own graduate work. I would be very reluctant to do that if I were you, because I do think there's some credibility to the line of reasoning that the teaching position, if it's a program where, for instance, they take in 8 graduate students, but only 4 of them get teaching positions, chances are the 4 that get the teaching positions are the ones that program has the most confidence in. Which doesn't necessarily mean those students will be successful, or that the other students will be less successful, but when universities have limited resources, this is one of the ways they tend to allot them. So I would be very cautious about accepting any position. And again, I would be cautious about accepting most positions. I'll say that, where you aren't being offered a teaching position or some sort of scholarship, tuition waiver, whatever it is, because that may indicate that they are not super confident about your ability to be successful. And unfortunately, that may be a reasonable concern on their part. So this is going to sound insulting, but I don't mean for it to be. If you apply particularly to multiple programs and no one accepts you, or no one offers you funding, you may want to think critically about your desire to go to graduate school. Now, the reason I don't want that to be insulting is because a lot of these things, both in terms of getting into graduate programs and also in terms of getting academic jobs afterwards, a lot of it is a crapshoot. Like, I've been on the academic job market for a few years now. There have been jobs that I think I would be perfect for based on the way that they're written. No interest whatsoever. It's a crapshoot. You get lucky on occasion. But again, especially if you've applied to multiple programs and no one has shown any interest, you may want to rethink things. Because I have known people who have gotten into graduate programs who probably should not have been there, and who weren't necessarily cut out for it. So, especially considering all of the hassle that goes with graduate work and all of the difficulties of getting academic jobs, if that's your ultimate goal, think carefully about it, about whether or not the difficulties of all of this stuff is worth the potential reward. Anyway, slightly off tangent. But again, so those are the two main considerations I would push you toward in deciding which graduate program is right for you. Are there faculty there who do the thing that you want to do and that can train you effectively? And are they going to offer you either financial support, or even better, if you want to be an academic, are they going to offer you a teaching position? So those are the top two things to think about.